So today's presentation will focus on the work of our legislative advocates, both directly and indirectly, in support of our budget, as well as to advance key county values. But before introducing our team, I'd like to quickly update the board and the public on the county's financial position. I would also like to suggest for the chair and the chair pro tem that going forward, we provide these budget updates to your board on an as-needed basis to reflect new and fresh developments and new information as it becomes available. For today, I can tell you that the budget pressures we have previously shared over multiple board members remain largely unchanged from prior presentations. To briefly recap, these challenges include paying the $4 billion settlement of sexual assault claims, as well as a growing number of new claims, investing in our workforce with bonuses and COLAs, navigating the costs and revenue impacts of the fires, and facing the threat of losing roughly $2 billion or more in federal funding in the coming years. We've already made a round of cutbacks, and we know that more are on the way, including additional curtailments of 5.5% as part of the upcoming supplemental budget phase. As previously highlighted, these will mean additional cuts to some very popular programs and services. Throughout it all, we remain committed to keeping the safety net intact for our most vulnerable residents. Federal pressures remain dynamic, and as various department heads have already highlighted for your board, the precise impact of federal cuts will not be fully known for all curtailments until the rules and regulations necessary to implement the so-called big bill are put into place by various agencies, ranging from HUD to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. New Medicaid regulations are expected to be released before the end of the year, and we will need to be ready to pivot accordingly. There also remains a lack of clear guidance from the courts regarding the administration's authority to unilaterally rescind previously funding appropriated by Congress. We believe that risks are increasing for discretionary grants to be withdrawn. In the meantime, we have our eye on a potential government shutdown that could happen as early as October 1st, the day after the supplemental budget comes to your board for approval. In short, we remain in a very dynamic and unpredictable economic climate, but we are not standing still. So in today's presentation, we will focus on some of the work our Legislative Affairs and Intergovernmental Relations team has been doing in Sacramento. And with that, please bring up the next, okay. So with that, I will turn it over to our legislative team, which is comprised of Angela Ovalle, Marvin Dion, and Andy Liebenbaum. Can we bring up the next slide, please?
Thanks, Fizia. Good afternoon, supervisors. As Fizia said, Angela Ovalle, Acting Branch Manager for Legislative Affairs, joined by Marvin Dion and Andy Liebenbaum from our Sacramento office. Our presentation today will provide a legislative update, including updates on our county-sponsored bills for 2025 and other significant bills, as well as some comments on the end of session and an outlook for next year. I don't have to tell you that this has been a year like no other. We've had the fires, the state's fiscal constraints, a new federal administration, and lots of federal actions and federal cuts to funding. This has created a lot of emergent and competing advocacy needs. So I would like to thank the board, CEO Budgets, and all the departments for their collaboration on our advocacy efforts this year, including our annual Sacramento and DC advocacy trips and numerous roundtable events with our delegation members that helped advance our legislative and budget priorities. Despite these challenges of the political dynamics and the state's fiscal outlook, LAIR developed comprehensive advocacy strategies and collaborated with like-minded partner organizations and counties to secure key policy and budget wins. The state's legislative session ended on Saturday, so today's presentation is a point-in-time presentation on some key bills. The governor now has until October 12th to sign or veto bills, and any signed bills become effective on January 1st, 2026, with the exception of budget bills and urgency bills, which become effective immediately upon signature. And now to speak about our county-sponsored bills, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, Angela. Andy Liebenbaum from your Sacramento office. Happy to be here. So we had 9 total bills Two have already, 9 bills that are policy bills and one funding request. Two have already been signed into law. So as you can see on the screen, SB 409, Senator Archuleta, we got enacted a provision that would increase the county's internal workforce account limit from $50,000 to $125,000. The significance of this is multifaceted. The first of the issues is it will allow the county to undertake improvements and maintenance in facilities, taking on deferred maintenance projects, but also this is a provision that hadn't been changed in law since 1982, so we've made some good progress for the county. A funding provision for the LA County fire camps. This provision provides $4.8 million to sustain Los Angeles County fire camp operations in both this fiscal year, 25-26, and in 26-27, preserving current funding levels and contracts. The county-operated fire camps provide training for qualified inmates in state custody to support rehabilitation and reentry. The other thing that this funding does is expands the frontline capacity and strengthens wildfire response throughout the county. We have 5 bills that are on the governor's desk. AB 287, Assemblymember Lackey, requires vote centers and polling places to provide accessible parking and secure storage. This was a top concern of our registrar. The accessible parking at vote centers is a key concern for residents. It provides people who have mobility issues with greater access to the vote centers. And then, of course, the secure storage facilities inside those vote centers allows us to keep ballots and other election materials safe during the election process. AB 1037 by Assemblymember El Hawari aligns outdated statutes and regulations for substance use disorder treatment with current best practices and proven approaches. The importance of this legislation is continuing with the state's recent programs to remove stigma and statutory barriers that prevent people with SUDs from getting the treatment that they need, and it will increase access to treatment options, improving SUD care, and ultimately saving lives throughout the county. SB 303 by Senator Smallwood Cuevas would shield employees' bias mitigation training from being used as evidence of bias. This is going to promote a safer and more transparent path for employees to confront and correct biases, therefore strengthening the public trust and improving our ability to deliver services. SB 413 by Senator Allen will allow attorneys engaged in civil actions against county child welfare and juvenile probation services to access juvenile records. This is going to speed up a resolution to lawsuits involving children in the county's care or custody.
Andy, hold on one
Next
second.
slide,
Can we
please.
get the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry. Next slide. There we are. So now we just did SB 413, which is the top. Now we'll go to SB 782 by Senator Perez. This is going to expand the use of enhanced infrastructure financing to support rebuilding efforts, which are critical in light of the fires. It's going to accelerate the county's wildfire recovery by creating new financing tool to finance repair and rebuilding projects and support economic recovery and workforce development in fire-impacted communities. So those bills are all on the governor's desk. We have 2 bills that have been made into 2-year bills, which means they can be taken up again in 2026. AB 970 by Assemblymember McKinnon would have created a 2-year county pilot to implement a decision tree for mandated reporting in the child welfare setting. The program would enhance training for mandated reporters to reduce over-reporting and to connect families at risk of being in the child welfare system with resources they need. AB 1129 by Celeste Rodriguez, also a 2-year bill, would have authorized local health officers to monitor birth defects or birth anomalies. It would have helped the County of Los Angeles track data, identify risk factors associated with birth defects and other postnatal conditions, thereby improving services for families facing healthcare challenges. Again, those bills could be brought up in 2026. And last, AB 351, this bill unfortunately did not move. It would have increased the campaign contribution threshold from $500 to $1,500 for licenses, permits, or other entitlements for use. It would have reduced staff time and cost preparing statements of disclosure while maintaining campaign finance transparency in compliance with the Levine Act. Unfortunately, that bill died in committee.
Thanks, Andy. In terms of other key bills of interest, I'd like to highlight a few of the bills that LAIR engaged on this year based on their significant fiscal impact or potential fiscal impact. The first is AB 100 by Assemblymember Gabriel. This was approved in April and implemented the state's early action budget package. This bill included urgently needed authority to assist local governments impacted by the Eaton and Palisades fire to offset recovery expenses and property tax losses. We also worked throughout the year on SB 577 by Senator Laird, which would have reformed how childhood sexual assault lawsuits against public entities proceed, with the goal of ensuring long-term solvency for local governments. The county had a support position on this bill, which was moved to the inactive file during the last week of session after negotiation on further amendments broke down. And SB 577 is now a 2-year bill. We also closely tracked AB 283 by Assemblymember Haney, which would have shifted collective bargaining from IHSS providers from the local level to the state. And while we did not have a position on this bill, LAIR requested clarifying language on who would be responsible for paying any salary increases negotiated by the state. This bill was amended late in the year to clarify that the state would pay the full cost of the non-federal share for any increased county and public authority administrative costs that resulted from state bargaining, and that there would be no county IHSS MOE adjustments for any increases agreed to in an MOU under state bargaining. 283 was placed on the inactive file during the last week of session. The county also supported AB 1430 by Assemblymember Bennett via a motion earlier this year. This bill, which passed the legislature and is pending with the governor, would increase recording fees for the first time since 2010, and the revenue could only be used for county recorders' offices. Based on recent recording activities in the county, this fee increase could generate approximately $9 million in additional revenue annually, which could reduce augmentation needed from the county's general fund for recording functions. And then finally, we have AB 338 by Assemblymember Salachi. This bill would appropriate $5 million to the California Workforce Development Board to allocate to the county's Department of Economic Opportunity. This funding would be used for workforce strategies for unemployed and underemployed low to moderate workers to support the recovery and rebuilding of areas impacted by the January wildfires and to aid workers affected by the fire. This would accelerate disaster recovery and long-term resilience in the region and increase the number of impacted individuals the county can serve, including those who may otherwise be excluded from federal aid. AB 338 is on the governor's desk, and if signed, it would become effective immediately as an urgency statute. And then finally, just very briefly on the trailer bills. On Monday and Tuesday of last week, the legislature released 17 budget trailer bills, which made adjustments to the previous enacted state budget and finalized some policy changes that had been subject of negotiations during the last weeks of session. Most notably, the Budget Bill Junior, or SB 105, includes language related to the previously approved $1 billion loan to support the county and the City of LA's recovery from the January wildfires. The language in the trailer bill authorizes the county and the city an extended period to negotiate loan terms with the state. And this is language that our Sacramento advocates proposed to the administration to allow us time to continue conversations with the state and come to agreement on loan terms. SB 105 also allocated Proposition 4 funding, this is the climate bond, for several county projects, including $16.2 million for Eaton Canyon, $15 million for the La Brea Tar Pits, $5.5 million for Charles White Park, and $5 million for Hughes Fire Recovery at Castaic Lake. SB 105 also has $2.5 million for resiliency improvements to the LA County Waterworks District 29 system. That is not Prop 4 funding, but instead funding from the Department of Water Resources Local Assistance Funds. And then finally of note, SB 105 includes funding for state and counties' response to HR 1 or the Big Bill. For the state, it provides $53.6 million to resource multiple multi-year activities that are part of the state's CalFresh payment error rate mitigation strategy and strategies that are necessary for counties to implement non-discretionary policy provisions of HR 1. The bill also allocates $40 million for county administration for HR 1 provisions related to able-bodied adults without dependents who will experience new work requirements due to the federal law. This trailer bill, SB 105, passed the legislature on Friday and is on the governor's desk. And now I'll turn it over to Marvin to provide his perspective on this year's legislative session and an outlook for next year.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Marvin Dion with CEO Lair. I'll start from the top. Just like in the county here, this year's legislative session began in Sacramento, completely focused on the fires. SAC Lair was immediately forced to pivot from our plan for the year and establish a new plan that included addressing the county's response and recovery needs with the fire on the fiscal side and the policy side. We saw numerous successes in that space where we were able to get some housing rules waived and also begin early conversations that ultimately resulted in additional funding for the county to support a lot of our response recovery efforts. So that was how we kind of made lemonade with the unexpected situation. The next major blip was HR 1, where, as we all know, we were kind of just knocked off of our balance immediately. It once again put us back into high drive. Our focus shifted from what we had kind of became our new normal with our normal bills and fire recovery. It shifted to, focusing on making sure that we were protecting against policy decisions in Sacramento that would ultimately hurt some of our most vulnerable populations here in the county. We were able to do that in a lot of places. We met with the LA delegation and the Bay Area caucus, offered some alternative ways to look at the reductions, and a lot of our recommendations were actually incorporated in the state's budget. Unfortunately, this work continues as the state is still digesting what HR 1 means and how it will impact the counties further down the line. And so we're meeting with legislators, the administration. I normally have calls with folks where they'll float concepts over and say like, hey, what does this do to the county? Sometimes I'm able to answer on the spot. Sometimes I connect with county departments and we're able to say like, well, if you do it that way, it hurts this many people. But if you modify it slightly, the impact is greatly reduced. And they've been receptive to a lot of our conversations. And so looking forward, our plan is to stay engaged and continue to provide kind of that sounding board. And I like to say that our county departments have been really responsive as we ask for those scenario kind of, what does this look like? What does that look like? So looking forward into next year's legislative session, much like the county, the state is facing fiscal difficulties. Everything that we hear is austerity and figuring out ways to manage federal decisions that are in the pipeline. Another shift that's going to be significant in Sacramento is we're moving into a new pro tem. And so Senator Mike McGuire won't be pro tem. Senator Monique Limon will be taking the lead. What that'll mean is a lot of shifting at the top. Once the dust kind of settles and we're able to see who's where, we'll renew our efforts to build relationships where they don't exist and kind of water the relationships that we've already developed on behalf of the county. So the outlook is tough, but we're up for it, and we will continue to do what we can on behalf of the residents of the county.
Thank you, supervisors. That concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I know the ink is still drying on some of the stuff with session just having adjourned Saturday, but I thought it was important that we get an update as quickly as possible, for a variety of reasons. Let me start with the thanks to Laird for your ability and capacity to pivot, because you got to pivot as lobbyists and advocates. I appreciate that. I appreciate you for the public briefing you all scheduled during our Sacramento trip to see, given the number of legislators that showed up, to hear directly from us and our department heads was, I think, maybe a first of its kind. And so I want to publicly acknowledge you pulling that together. I want to thank the Legislative County Caucus, who are truly, from my perspective, stepping up and showing up to understand HR 1's impact on our constituents, for them to understand that we have shared constituency, and they are looking to us, I think, in our department heads more and more to really understand how those federal budget cuts will be operationalized and impact their constituents. And thank you on the pivot on the $53 million. We talked about it last week when our department heads were here talking about the challenges, and I know that there were some of the anti-poverty advocates were trying to make it happen, and I choose to believe that when LA County's lobbyists stepped up, it made the difference, so thank you for that. A couple of questions for me. It may be premature to ask this, what you think the total amount of state funding that could potentially come to the county based on what's on the governor's desk, based on actions taken in these last TBLs. Do you have that number? Or is that something you need to come back to us with? I know that.
So we'll come back to you with the final number once the governor signs all
Okay.
the bills. We do expect action on the budget trailer bills fairly soon. And as I mentioned, there were 17 budget trailer bills that came out on Monday and Tuesday, so we are working with the departments to go through those. But so far, we've identified approximately $90 million of one-time funding. That includes the recorder's fees that I mentioned from AB 1430, the $5 million one-time funding for DEO for workforce development, the $42.2 million in one-time Prop 4 funding, as well as the funding for the Waterworks District that came from the Department of Water Resources. And then there was another trailer bill, the number escapes me right now, but it includes $31.8 million annually for probation from the Community Corrections Performance Incentives Program. What's unknown at this point is what our county share will be from the $1 billion loan program. That obviously will depend on where we land with the loan terms and then the projects we put forward for consideration with the state. There's also a pot of $20 million in one-time Prop 4 funding for fire resilience grants, and LA County is one of 8 counties that is eligible for that grant program. So again, there's a pot of money. We don't know how much money will be available to us, if it's going to be a competitive grant or formula funding. As you know, the budget trailer bills don't have a lot of language, so that's something we need to go back to the state on. And then I also mentioned the $40 million for administration of HR 1 provisions related to the able-bodied adults without dependents. Our share of that funding has not been determined yet either. Okay. So we'll have better numbers for you, hopefully, in the next week or so.
I appreciate that. I just think it's important that we keep front and center both the good news and the bad. And given the state of the state's budget, just that itemized list you just ran through, I think is some good news that I just want us all to be able to keep front of mind. I want to figure out how we can support you be as successful as you can in putting forward our priorities. So I'm curious, what are some of your pain points or some of the threats to your ability to really, execute your strategy on behalf of the priorities we ask you to move forward?
I'd say we really roll with the punches as they come because every day is unpredictable in Sacramento. Um, I think we actively reach out to your offices in order to ask for support when we think strategically it makes sense. So, you know, I think actually I might need a little more time to kind of figure
Okay,
it out,
that's
and
fair.
we
That's
can
fair.
kind of circle back and figure out if there are places where we could partner.
That's
Supervisor?
fair, and I certainly would want to know what we can do to, guarantee your success in advocacy on our behalf. The CEO has.
Thank you, Supervisor. Just from my vantage point, sitting in LA and working with both the DC office and the Sacramento office, one is to speak with more clarity, where we are prioritizing our priorities. We know that we have a lot going on in the county, and there are this is lobbying and legislation, so there's conversations happening all the time. And I feel like I spend time on the phone with Lair, figuring out how to correct, pivot, address, calibrate the message that is so easy to get confused in these legislative spaces. So one is prioritizing our priority, two is speaking with more clarity, and then three is for our offices in both Sacramento and in DC to be able to distinguish between the priorities from a particular board office and distinguish that from a countywide priority. Because when we're talking to folks in Sacramento, they don't distinguish the difference. So those are three things that I can see from my vantage point here in LA.
And I appreciate that, having been on the receiving end, and I've said that a lot of times. It was really frustrating when I'd get one list of priorities and then I'd get calls that contradicted, or the calls from people who didn't know about the list of priorities. So I get that. And I feel that we certainly have done a better job at that, particularly working in such close collaboration with the LA County Caucus. And you have to pivot and new things arise. I get that, but I hear you, and having been on the receiving end, I get it, and I think that we've done better, but we can always,
I
improve.
agree that we've done better and we've elevated our pivoting game. And the other thing I'll say is it impacts our credibility when these three are sitting in a legislator's office or talking to a staffer and they don't know about another conversation, like a meaningful conversation that has happened in the county.
Touche, and I get it. Last point I would make is just something I've spent a lot of time on as a former state legislator. I've continued it on my board service, and that's really, operationalizing co-governance. And in this context, really thinking about how we enlist the support of county advocates and community-based organizations on our local partners in helping to really kind of shape our advocacy strategies, or even, have them there to be alongside our department heads or alongside you all to communicate our priorities. And so I don't know if you all have considered that, if that's something we could talk about going into the next year, but just how we, continue to put tools in your toolkit to bring the voice of LA County residents to Sacramento and help elevate our agenda. Last, as you mentioned, federal, I didn't want to forget our federal partners. Similarly to the public briefing you all put together, I want to thank your your DC team for responding to a request from Congresswoman Kamlager Dove to have a presentation for the California delegation virtually this past week. That happened. We had department heads there, department heads from public health, health services, mental health. In addition
DPSS.
to, say it again?
DPSS and DHS.
Thank you very much. To, much like we did in Sacramento, share directly with our congressional delegation what HR 1 is going to do to our ability to provide services to our shared constituency. Had great participation from the LA County Caucus and some other county representatives as well who are in the California delegation. So thank you for
Yes.
making that happen. I think that the cheat sheet that our department heads put together about impacts,
Yes.
administrative cuts, and as well as program curtailments were heard loud and clear. So I think it was helpful.
Yeah, and thank you for your office for co-hosting, and thank you to the departments that participated. It really was important for our delegation members, and it was the members themselves that joined, as well as some of their staff. We had, I think, 7 representatives on that call. We had a very fruitful conversation with them. The department's asks were very concrete, and we were asked to provide a one-pager of all our asks, which we are finalizing. I believe it went out this morning, to do some follow-up with our delegation members as they get ready to advocate about some of these impacts on HR 1.
Thank you for fighting for us and helping us fight for Angelenos. Thank you, Madam Chair.